Welcome back, everyone. Let's talk a little bit about variables, or attributes as what they are called in Stencyl. So variables are extremely important, and it doesn't matter what kind of programming you're doing. If it's game programming or app development, basically you'll need a lot of variables, and you'll also need to know what they do. So basically variables store data. This data can be numbers, text, coordinates, true or false, and more. There's a ton of different kinds of variables. But basically what these do is they store data and you constantly call them throughout the game. Now, one thing about games is that they tend to have a lot more variables than you would probably think. I've actually had games where there's over 200 variables, and that is, actually fairly small compared to some of the bigger games. Let's talk about variables or attributes again. So in Stencyl, variables are called attributes. There are two kinds of attributes, global attributes and local attributes. Stencyl simplifies this concept and it makes it very effective. What this means is that when you're programming a game and when you're programming an app, you can have several different kinds of variables. And where you access these variables can get really complicated. So what this means is that global variables can be accessed throughout the entire game. So it doesn't matter where you are, you can always access that data. Local variables basically only go to a certain area. So if you're in a certain part of the game, and a certain part can only access that data. Let's talk about attributes and scope. What this means is that the scope of an attribute is where it can be accessed. And in traditional programming, there are several different kinds of scope. So, for example, you could have a global variable which can be accessed anywhere. You can have a variable that can be only accessed within, let's say, a class, and then you can have another variable that is accessed within a certain kind of game object. So, and you can actually go even farther than that. You can take that and basically you can have 10 different kinds of scope with variable. And we don't really need to know a lot about that because Stencyl actually simplifies this to having two. Attributes which you can see throughout the entire game and attributes which you can only see in a part of a game. And that's where Stencyl really shines because it only lets you set up global and local. Okay? And basically what ends up happening is that this simplifies game development quite a bit. So the hardest part about attributes is knowing what attribute to use when. And in other programming languages there are so many different kinds of scope it can actually get quite confusing. But for the most part, what we will do is use a whole bunch of global variables. Again, local variables are used specifically for objects in Stencyl. So let's say you have a player and it has a health. Health won't be a global, it will be a local. Although you can make it global, but for the most part, health will only be attributed to that one specific object. Okay, so you can see something like lives and is alive or not. Those are other variables that we'll use. Global variables need to be accessed by everyone, and so this could be data such as score, in-app purchases, level numbers, and time. Welcome back, everyone. Okay, I'm going to show you how to create some global variables in this tutorial. So what we need to do is we need to go up and click settings here. Now, if you go on and click attributes and go into create new, you can go ahead and this is how you create new global variables. There's another way to do that and I'll show you right after this. Now the name of the variable, you want to make sure that they are very specific. So if the variable, if you're doing the score, you want to make sure that it is actually labeled score. Or if you want to, let's say, level 1 score and you're having a multi-level score game, you want to make sure that it says level 1 score. You want to be very specific with the name. So for this we'll just put score. Now the category, as your game gets bigger, you want to make different categories for your variables. But when you're just learning, you can just put everything in the default. As you can see, there's only default here, but you can go ahead and actually create different categories for it. Now, down here, you can see that there is the type of variable. So there's a number, text, Boolean, which means yes or no, or list, and the initial value. So what we're going to do is scores are usually a number. In fact, they're most often a number. And the initial value is going to be 0. Let's say if you wanted to do health or starting health like that, you could, let's say, make it 100. The initial value is what it starts at. Okay, so let's just go back to our score example here, and we're just going to go ahead and push 0. Now you push OK, and then all of a sudden here, this is your new variable, and you can see this right over here. Okay, the other way to create global variables is to go over to the attributes section here, push game attributes, and push create new game attribute. Now, when you're messing around with this area here, you want to make sure that you're using this one instead of the first one. And the reason for that is when you're creating a variable here, it shows up right here. And what that means is that you can actually go ahead and use it right away. If you create it here in this one, the settings, you might not be able to use it right away. So let's create another variable, and we'll call this starting health. And it's again going to be a number, and we're going to push the initial value is this time is going to be 100. Okay, so now you can see we've just created 2 attributes or variables. I'll see you guys in the next tutorial.